I studied astrology because I was deeply interested in birthdays. A memory by Ciro Discepolo from the book L'uomo e le stelle, intervista all'astrologia, edizioni ricerca 90, Milan, 822 pages, May 2023. Paola Canatello asks, you said earlier that an astrologer must try his hand at life, and I'd say you've had plenty of experience in that regard. At this point, I'd like to know where it all began. What was your baptism with the stars? Ciro Discepolo replies, I should point to the insightful conversation I had with a fellow soldier at Latina Airport in 1970, while I was serving as an airman at that military airport. However, I believe that before that date, there were other moments in my life in which symbols exerted a tremendous pressure on me, pushing me to identify a path already written in my destiny. The extremely precise language of symbols, for those who care to read it, had already indicated to me that I would be interested in the stars, the heavens, and astrology. Paola Canatello asks, well, you've piqued my curiosity. What are you referring to? Ciro Discepolo replies, I would identify 3 key moments in this direction. The first is particularly interesting. I would say extraordinarily interesting. The most incredible thing is that between the ages of 20 and 32, I went through 3 very long and intense, in-depth analyses with 2 different analysts, both Jungians, orthodox analyses, as they called them in those days. I had up to 5 sessions a week, without intercepting a single element that would later surface several years later. And this happened through a precise, very precise memory from my childhood, which only a blind person would not connect to my entire destiny, which I believe was determined by this very episode. I was 4 years old. I know this for certain because I have enough evidence to precisely place this episode in time, of which I have a vivid memory. I can even recall every tiny detail of the room in our little house in Vico Equense, where I was at that moment. My father worked as an engineer at the shipyards in Castellammare di Stabia, and I spent almost all my time with my mother, whom I adored and who was my whole life, my horizon. We had a visceral bond even though I was the third of 4 children. Before me were Rosanna, born during the war, and Leah, born in 1945 at the end of the war. Then I arrived in 1948, and finally, 4 years later, my brother Bruno was born. But the relationship between my mother and I was and remained very, very special. Probably above all because she'd somehow taken on enormous responsibility with respect to the expectations of my grandfather Ciro, whom we called Papa Sirotto, as he wanted, and who desperately wanted a male grandson who would carry his name. But up until that point, my parents had only had 2 daughters, and Papa Sirotto was quite annoyed. My mother told me that on July 16th, 1948, the feast of Carmine, knowing she was about to give birth, she went in the evening to pray at the Church of Carmine in Naples. She was very devout, actually, I should say more bigoted, and so she prayed intensely to Our Lady of Mount Carmel so that she would have a son. And a few hours later, around dawn, because I was born at 5:40 in the morning, my mother gave birth. Ciro was finally born, and my grandfather, despite being in the throes of one of his asthma attacks that nearly killed him, jumped out of bed to rush to see this grandson who would be named after him, and he went wild with joy. So perhaps this was the bond that united my mother and me, and which was also fueled by the fact that I was rather frail when I was born. I later found a typewritten sheet of paper my father had written, a sort of diary he began filling out shortly after I gave birth, where he noted that just a few hours after my birth, my mother was giving me drops of I don't know what with a metal spoon to reinvigorate me. Who knows, perhaps it's precisely this act of sucking in from birth not only food but also drugs that has given rise to a psychological process I might even dare to call pharmacophilia. This perhaps also explains my enormous propensity to study such subjects such as homeopathic medicine, Chinese acupuncture, macrobiotics, and many similar things, in contrast to my brother Bruno's pharmacophobia, which throughout his life never wanted to take even a pill for a headache. Sometimes he would suffer excruciating ones for a whole week and stubbornly refused to take even an aspirin. I still enjoy studying homeopathy, and I also enjoy experimenting. Why not? I constantly interact with my current homeopath, Mimmo De Carlo, whom I consider the best homeopathic doctor in Italy. He fraternally gives me advice on testing the effects of other homeopathic medicines on the ailments that a 75-year-old man inevitably has, even though fortunately I don't have any pathologies at this time, as of January 7th, 2023. So going back to that day, even though I was only 4 years old, I managed to detect a hint of sadness, discomfort, and unease in my mother's eyes. Very upset, I expressed my concern in my own way, and she replied, Cirusie, that's what she called me, obviously the Neapolitan nickname for Ciro, your mother is sad because today is her birthday. I didn't understand. What does that mean? I asked her. That today I've gotten older. I didn't fully grasp this passage. I didn't understand exactly what it meant. But I found in this explanation a unique connection between the birthday and a mortal danger, a foreshadowing, albeit distant, of the loss of that very important figure that was my mother, a threat of abandonment that completely shook me to my core. My response was instantaneous. In my imagination, I immediately conceived of a patch to protect this breach, to prevent this hole in the dam from spilling water and causing a flood. In an infinitesimal amount of time, with great naivety but also with great love, I quickly developed my solution. Don't worry, Mom, because every year, on your birthday, I will tie you to the chair with a rope so you won't grow old. The childish, spontaneous, yet lovable attempt of a child who doesn't want to lose his mother and wants to hold on to her with everything he can. I would have held her tight, tied her to the chair with a rope, so she wouldn't age and consequently leave me. So it's obvious that's where my lifelong interest began, not so much in astrology but in birthdays, because only when I consciously realized the entire process of those few seconds in which I processed this immeasurable emotion, which was probably one of the strongest emotions of my life, did I remain forever connected to the idea of birthdays. So I like to think that all my subsequent interest in astrology was nothing more than a tool, that of astrology, to perfect the absolute need I had to freeze my birthday or to be able to control it. There was certainly a fantasy of power in this desire, but in my opinion, all the human beings who have made important discoveries, from Marie Curie, Einstein, Samuel Hahnemann, I don't want to make comparisons that might seem blasphemous, but I believe that all those who have allowed humanity to make progress started from fantasies of power. Because if you don't aim very high, you won't achieve great results. So, in my opinion, this childhood event establishes my first enormously potential contact with astrology. However, it also exposes the fact that my interest in astrology was almost certainly nothing more than a way to use ancient and technical knowledge to achieve birthday control. All my astrology is nothing more than birthday control. In short, we could say this: